Hello and welcome to the Hardy Brain, the show that takes athletic, introverted entrepreneurs and leaders and transforms them into ironclad brain performers. I'm your host, Dr. David Hardy. And today on our show, we've got another amazing guest. He is an international keynote speaker, a master storyteller, and an expert on the topic of invisible disabilities. Welcome to the show, Jason Reid. How you doing there?
I'm doing really well, David. I'm psyched to be here. This is going to be fun.
I'm really excited about this show and episode because when we talk invisible disabilities, people think it's like rarity that oh yeah, there might be somebody at work who's struggling or has something physically going on that we can't notice and see. But to be honest, it's a large amount of the workforce. It's probably 1/3 to half of the workforce, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are really challenging. I usually say it's about a third. And one of the reasons why they're challenging is because the way studies are done, there has been no significant study done on invisible disabilities as a general umbrella. There tends to be ones done on
Right.
physical. But then when we get to mental illnesses, that's an invisible disability as well. People with neurodivergent traits, whether it's autism, ADHD, or a number of other conditions, those are all invisible disabilities. And yeah, they definitely add up quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And also just not feeling good.
That's a main part
And
of it.
people try to hide that, but like for instance, in your case, it was Crohn's disease, right?
Yes, I had Crohn's disease with a side order of arthritis, and they often kind of come together because they're
Right.
both autoimmune conditions. So it's
Absolutely.
basically your body's immune system attacking different systems. So with Crohn's, it's the gut. With arthritis, it's the joints. And for both of them, I basically say even though the symptoms are technically a lot different, they really boil down to two things. And one is chronic pain, and the other is that loss of energy. And with that will sometimes come brain
Right.
fog. And that ends up coming with a host of other things about doubting yourself or wondering, okay, am I going to be able to do this on a certain day because I don't know how I'm going to feel.
Yeah. And for people who aren't aware of autoimmune disorders, I kind of term it more immune dysregulation. And that when it's labeled, they've identified what tissue is actually being attacked by the immune system. But if you boil it down and look inside the disease process there, it is a polarization of the immune system and dysfunction in it. And to put it in perspective, the numbers just keep growing and the ages keep getting younger. It's kind of like what diabetes used to be. Diabetes type 2 used to be just in a sick elderly population, and then it crept into midlife and then into childhood even. And we're seeing the same thing happening with autoimmune disorders now. And then on top of that, you mentioned, yeah, invisible disorders such as mental health or brain disorders. And the World Economic Forum and the European Brain Council crunched the numbers on that, and they've put it up to 3 to 5 trillion dollars is being spent right now on brain disorders. And another incredible fact is there's only 2 countries in the world with a GDP that high.
Right?
And this is a lot of people's lives. And just walk us through kind of the turmoil you found trying to keep it together in a workplace when you're not feeling good. When, yeah, you've got brain fog, your joints hurt, and you're constantly having to run to the washroom.
Yeah. So you know what? There's a couple levels. There's the things that you describe, which are the things that most people, when they think about, think are the major challenges. But in some cases, that's actually I don't want to say the easiest stuff to deal with, but it's the most straightforward to deal with.
Right.
Actually, the biggest challenge in the workplace is misunderstanding and
Mm.
communication
How so?
because you've got all this stuff going on. You have all of these challenges, you've got all these barriers and this friction. And the people around you, especially if it's invisible, number one, may not know that you're going through that at all. So they're just wondering, well,
Right.
why are you so weird? And then even when you try to explain yourself, you know, most people, as you know, David, are not doctors, and it can be really challenging because these conditions are complex and people want that like super simple answer. So oddly enough, one of the things I would do, and I'm sure a lot of people do, is lie. So, if
Yeah.
I'm having a bad day with my Crohn's, if I've got a lot of pain in my gut and people ask me what's going on, I would say, oh, I must have, I've got some food poisoning, or, I've got the flu or whatever. You end up defaulting to something that people can understand. So you don't have to have that sort of long drawn out conversation. But the
Right.
one thing I should bring up is things are not perfect in the workplace, but things are definitely a lot better, because there is a little bit more awareness now of what's going on. Number one, and number two, and this is the big thing for me, and I had to really fight for these things, is flexibility. Because for most people
Mm,
with invisible disabilities, we're still capable. We just need to find the ways that we can still get the work done. Um,
absolutely.
an example I sometimes give is, having been a journalist, I'm really good at writing something very quickly. But if you gave me a computer where suddenly all of the keys are in different places, then I've got a challenge. So that becomes a barrier or a friction, much like pain or fatigue or whatever. I'm still as talented a person, but it may take me a little bit longer to do a task, and it may require a lot more energy, even when I'm drained. But if I can find a tool, if I can find a keyboard, for instance, that works the way my brain kind of naturally wants to work, then that allows me to get more done and sort of take care of my health a little bit better. So for me, it was trying to find ways
Right.
of, how do I go and have a nap, for instance, when, napping, especially in news where everything is changing, it's not exactly something that people want to be seen to do. And it was often criticized. So I would use the tools available. I would go into the sick room. Maybe I'm not, quote unquote,
Mm,
sick or in pain,
right.
but I would go and I would lay down for 20 minutes or half an hour if I had that time, because I knew that would allow me to perform better. And it's just a process of figuring out, okay, given the system I work in, because people don't want to be flexible within that system, how can I use what's already there to my own advantage?
Absolutely. Now, as a journalist and a writer here, if you were to report on somebody basically from the start of their day when they showed up to work or even before, and kind of put that into a story or layer it into an article, a newsworthy article, how would it start off for somebody? What would the beginning of the day look like for them, and how would you report on it?
I absolutely love that question, because this is something that I often bring up in my presentations, in the
Right.
understanding part, because people don't understand um, decision fatigue. And as an
Yeah.
educated person who's up on things, I'm sure you and a lot of your listeners are aware that every time you're kind of forced to make a decision, that takes a certain amount of energy. So it's particularly challenging when your energy is low to begin with. So let's look at a start of a day of a typical workplace where you actually have to go into work for 9 o'clock and deal with traffic and stuff like that. So if you have a painful illness like Crohn's, it's inherently unpredictable. Some days you're going to wake up, you're going to feel fine. Other days you wake up, you're going to feel terrible. And those days you wake up and feel terrible, sometimes 2 hours later you're fine, and sometimes 2 hours later you're worse, but you don't know what it's going to be. So just imagine getting up and just getting ready for work, and those, say, 2 hours or so before you leave, and you're feeling lousy, and part of you is going, oh, you really shouldn't go into work today. You feel lousy. And then a couple of minutes later, it's, oh, I feel a little bit better. Oh, I'm going to be fine. And then it's like, oh, no, I'm really not feeling very well. I shouldn't go into work. And then, well, I've got this project I have to do. So you're going through all these decisions, and you become so fatigued before you even leave the door. And then you have to deal with,
Oh, yes.
the traffic and everything else. So before you get to work, the energy level, or,
You're wiped out.
yeah, you're absolutely done. And this is a real challenge, and it's also where that flexibility can help too. If you know that you have the option to work from home, it just kind of makes one less major decision you have to make at the beginning of the day, which could actually save your energy for the whole day.
Right. Okay. So they battle through this. They fight through this fatigue. They probably wake up feeling fatigued already. That yeah, I had 10 hours of sleep, but I feel like I've been through 3. And now, yeah, do I go to work? Am I okay? How bad's the day going to be? They battle through this. And let's say it's a high pressure news situation. What's it going to sound like when the boss or a colleague starts asking tasks then? What's that process like? Like that's got to be painful.
It is. And, the more, one of the interesting things about something like news, and I think one of the reasons why I was drawn to news is there's a certain adrenaline rush you get from it. And
Yeah.
this is the interesting thing is, a lot of my success in news, whether it was as a writer or producer or a manager, came from just the adrenaline. That's where I got my energy from. So in some ways it's a positive, but and oddly enough, when you're in charge, it does actually make it a little bit easier because if you're smart and you develop good relationships with your employees, um, you can, I don't want to say offload the work, but you can figure out, okay, what are the more challenging things that I can have somebody else deal with? But I mean, it is a huge
Mhm.
challenge because again, these are more decisions that need to be made. And when you're on the lower levels, you can still do this if you have like a good relationship with people and they understand what's going on. But the biggest challenge then comes when you have somebody who is higher up on the hierarchy demanding something of you that is just, you're questioning whether you can actually physically do it or not.
Right. Now, productivity always comes up, and uh, if people aren't productive, then more and more pressure builds up on them, right?
Yes.
So, how does that even happen? Like, or how do people take control over that? Because even if it's a bad day and you have a great colleague who's going to help you out, eventually they're going to get tired of always kind of helping people out.
Yeah, and it is a balance, right? And I coached people for a while. I coached managers and people in high performance jobs, and it was always that trade off, right? So when you're feeling well, you can take more on, and then you can help that person. You can let that person know, hey, you know what, got a good energy day today. Or if you find yourself having time that you can help someone, going over, hey, can I help you with this? So you always want to make sure that balances out. Um, but it is interesting in that one of the things that I did was I actually created a little tool for myself to actually manage my energy because
Okay.
I realized that we think of personal energy as this monolithic thing when really it isn't. There's sometimes I'm actually quite good with socializing or talking to people. I have the energy for that, but I don't have the mental energy for math or logic. Or I've got the energy for writing, or I've got the energy for this or that. So I created like 7 or 8 different categories where I would rank myself during the day, and I would get a sense of where I was better at certain tasks timing wise. So that
Hmm.
definitely helped me in sort of the project oriented environment. And it was really funny because when I first started speaking about this, I introduced this very simple tool. It was basically, I mean, you can make it probably an app now. Actually, there's somebody I know who is, but it was originally just a piece of paper. You'd like write down numbers. And I showed this to a bunch of occupational health nurses, and they loved it. And they ended up
Okay.
actually publishing it in their journal. So I've got this thing published in a medical journal.
Wow.
And I was like, well, hold on a sec. I mean, you guys literally have millions of dollars at your disposal to sort of create these things. How do you not have this? And the answer was,
Welcome
well,
to healthcare.
we're academics and we tend to create things that are overly complicated. Yours is super simple. That's why it works.
So It was just kind of listing which tasks and where you were at energy wise.
Exactly. Just to give myself that general baseline to be able to plan my day. With
Right.
news, it's tough
I
because
love it.
sometimes
And
things happen when you're not at your best, and that's when, for me, anyways,
right.
that adrenaline would kick in. But the thing to remember about the adrenaline is, it's kind of like going into debt. So if you're running on
Oh,
adrenaline a lot
yes.
during the day, at some point you are going to crash, and you're going to crash hard. So you got to be prepared for that too.
And that's the biggest thing. Like I see it just rampantly out there, and people don't even need to be diagnosed with anything yet. But just that, once again, feeling of alertness versus
Oh yeah.
restedness is kind of that pattern of a pot of coffee to wake up and then a bottle of wine to go to bed. And it is just not sustainable. And then it turns into pills and turns into more doctor visits. It just becomes this spiral. Now, one of the things I think, and this goes back to that chart and great productivity hack you had, is that, yeah, we can learn a lot from people who are struggling and doing this because, yeah, you found ways around it. So, what are other ways, like diet, maybe energy management, that have been sustainable that you're able to share with other people to improve their lives with or without something going on with them?
Well, it's interesting you bring up diet. I,
I know it's like the
right?
major, I can take control of something in my life for somebody with an autoimmune disorder.
It is, but there's also a challenge, right? So I'm gonna probably
Oh,
go a little
yes.
bit off script, but this is gonna be good because I don't think people are gonna necessarily expect this answer. So we're living in an age where we are surrounded by health information in magazines and people saying this
Hmm.
or that, or oh my goodness, you're not actually healthy unless you eat this one berry that's like really super rare. And it's like,
Oh, yeah.
but the challenge,
It's all
yeah,
generalized advice. It's not specific.
exactly. So
Yeah.
for me, and a lot of people don't, they question this. This is absolutely true. For 20 years, because of my Crohn's, my parts of my intestine were so narrow, I couldn't tolerate any fiber. So that meant no fruits. That meant
Right.
no vegetables. That meant
Hmm.
no fiber. So I lived on all the unhealthy stuff, including like I didn't absorb salt very well. So high salt was good for me. High fat
Yep.
was good,
Absolutely, it would be.
right? So, but
Hmm.
here's the challenge, right? People see me at work and they're seeing me eating hamburgers and french fries, potato chips, and they never see me eat a vegetable. So, what do you think happens? Do you think maybe they judge me? Do you think maybe that they go, well, Jason really isn't looking after his health? No wonder he's sick. And that
Hmm.
becomes the real challenge. And that challenge has dovetails because then what a lot of people do, and I tried to do this too, is okay, if I'm around people, I'm going to mask and I'm going to pretend to be healthy. So I would, sometimes actually start eating vegetables just around people to show them that, oh, I'm eating vegetables now. And then, of course, I would pay for it. So
Oh,
yeah. So
no.
one of the things that I
Yeah.
tend to tell people who have chronic conditions is really find out what works for you because sometimes when our bodies are out of kilter, that typical health advice just won't work for us. And sometimes it makes it worse.
Right.
So much like that little chart that I did, being aware of your own body and what works for you and what doesn't, for me was like the huge idea that I could sort of still use today is very much personalized energy management.
I love it. And yeah, you're either around a group of friends who does the same thing, or you're the oddball doing something
Mhm.
different. And once again, how do people kind of get through that? Oh, I'm being judged oddball stage in their life. Like the spotlight's on them and not in a good way.
Yeah.
What are some kind of mindset things or things you figured out to kind of push through that
You know, I yeah,
uncomfortableness?
I leaned into being a freak, right? I just realized, you know what? I
Yes.
am never going to conform to what everybody else thinks. So you know what? I am just going to, and it sounds so trite, uh, but it's true. I just made a decision. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to lean in to who I am and what works for me. And, people can kind of take it or leave it. I'm willing to explain if somebody's curious, but I really stopped worrying about what other people think. I mean, other than my character,
Right.
am I a good person, whatever.
Hmm.
I really stopped worrying about what other people think. Easier said than
Fantastic.
done.
Right. It's a journey through that,
It
isn't it?
is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like anything, it's not usually all of a sudden.
And you know what? I have to say again, the world is definitely getting better. I'm probably living in a slightly different reality, and that the workplaces that I'm invited to tend to be a little bit more progressive. But I'm tending to see
Right.
now that people are more comfortable leaning into who they are, especially around. Even though I'm not neurodivergent, I've been doing a lot of talks with a colleague of mine around neurodivergence, and I'm noticing people, with autism, with ADHD, are finally kind of trying to lean into who they are rather than masking and pretending that they're quote unquote normal people, because the masking process
Right.
is exhausting. It's exhausting.
Oh, yes. And that kind of brings us down to those points where we feel that emotional burden is that there's kind of two outlets, crying or laughing. And yeah, you're going to be doing both. But what I found is, like, especially mental health, when I was teaching in that setting way back in another career, it was just bizarre the things we would laugh at that we couldn't go out into like a regular public setting and have that humor. But you've written comedy before. So what's your perspective on humor and on disabilities and people's struggles then?
Yeah, I'll take a look at this in a couple of different phases. So, in terms of, I'll talk about the kind of creating humor professionally in a moment, but just I think in terms of how humor affects people, especially when it affects people in a positive way, I think it's a form of socialization. Like comedies always tended to be social,
Yeah.
right? You want to laugh with people.
Right.
But when you think about it, even when you're in your home, if you're watching a comedy routine on TV, it still kind of feels like socialization, right? Because you hear people
Hmm.
laughing, you're kind of still connecting with another human being. And I'll take it even further. Even when you're by yourself, like let's say you're all dressed up to go somewhere important, and you go and you're headed out the door, you're still in your socks, you haven't put your shoes on, and you step in the dog's dish, right? And you have like dog food all over your feet. you know the first moment you're going to go swear, but then a lot of people will laugh. And the interesting thing
Yeah.
is that's still kind of social, because what's hugely when we laugh at ourselves like that is we're getting out of our head and viewing that situation as if we were someone else. And I think that's hugely important with mental health, is the ability to get out of our head at times, because we get into that what I call like the negative spiral, right? Where we catastrophize, or it's just like, oh my goodness, everything's going wrong. And giving ourselves just that little
Right.
bit of perspective and feeling like we're part of the larger world, when in a lot of cases, I think one of the challenges with invisible disabilities or any disability is it makes you feel separate from everybody. And, often, you may have fewer friends, you may not be going out because, you've got a lot of pain and fatigue. So it's almost a way of re-socializing a little bit into the world. So kind of that's my view on sort of comedy for everyone. But I have to say for myself, um, writing comedy and being able to make people laugh was a huge confidence booster for me, and I think it is for a lot of comedians and
Okay.
when people write this. It's a power, right? I used to say it's kind of like sex, but in a lot of ways it's very different. So I won't use that analogy, but I think it's probably kind of like being good looking and it, right? Or being really charming and
Hmm.
it. It's that power that you can kind of pull out when you need it to get along in social situations, or keep from being beaten up, or even kind of amuse yourself. So probably one of the most interesting extremes of this was I had a perforated intestine, and had a bad infection, ended up in the hospital, had this like emergency surgery for 3 hours. I only made it because I was 18 and I was like the right age. But I woke up and I'm in intensive care. And my sister's there and she's talking to me, but I realize I can't talk to her back because I have this tube down my throat, this ventilator. So,
Right.
and I've got all these other things attached to me because it's intensive care. And I realize I can't move. I can't move my head. I can't do anything. All I can do is look up at the ceiling at this flickering fluorescent light that I know is going to like literally drive me crazy because I'm being told I'm going to be in there for several days. So I start worrying as much about my mental health as I am my physical health because I can't speak, I can't communicate. I don't know whether it's day or night because I'm on these painkillers. So I'm going in and out of consciousness. There's no windows, the light's on all the time, just really disorienting. So I decide that I'm so.
Doesn't sound like the ideal place to heal.
No, it is not. It is not. And it'll give you part of the story that makes this even worse in a way. So I'm in this situation and I think to myself, like, I feel so helpless, especially as a communicator. I feel like I need some sense of control, some sense of power that I have something. And I realized that one thing I could
Right.
do, the one thing I could move was my wrist. So I thought, okay, I can do this or this. So I remember my parents
Thumbs up, thumbs
thumbs up,
down.
thumbs
Yep.
down, right? So I remember my parents coming into the room after I'd come up with this idea, and I gave them a big thumbs up. And I could literally feel the tension lower because I was day to day. They didn't know whether I was going to survive or not. I didn't realize this at the time, but it was pretty dicey. So
Hmm.
I remember the
Wow.
exhale my dad gave, and then saying to my mom, like, "Look who's happy to see us." And then I also realized I could inject, as people having conversations, I could interject, I could communicate. And when this is all you can do, after a day or two, your timing gets really good. And I found I could make people laugh. And that was the
Okay.
amazing thing because intensive care is all these little rooms and people are crying. So they're really down, but I could make my parents or nurses or whatever laugh if they were engaged in conversation with me, to the point where at one point I heard a doctor chiding one of the nurses for laughing. It's like, oh, this is intensive care. This isn't the place for laughter. I'm like, dude, you don't realize how hard it is to actually get people to laugh in intensive care, and I'm doing it. But you know, the wonderful thing was the power I felt. It's like I can't even speak, but yet I have the power to change people's states just by doing this. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that even when I feel powerless, there is so much I can do, even on a small level, to change another person's life.
I love it. Wow. Now, what are some of the stories you've heard of other people maybe coming up to you after like a keynote speech and kind of going into their story? Has there been a couple that is like, wow, now I feel like I can tell my story?
There's been a lot of them. It's really hard. I can't think of necessarily one that was um, more dramatic than another one. But one of the things that I do like about people coming up to me is even if they're in the middle of it, of whatever, one of the things I love about them asking me questions is you can tell there's this little ray of hope. It's just like, okay,
Yes.
this
Yeah.
is where I am right now, but I know that there's some way I can get to at least the next step. And, if not cure my illness, if not become a millionaire, at least feel a bit better about my life. And those are conversations I really cherish because, inspiration, especially inspiration on the stage, and I try not to label myself an inspirational speaker because I don't like those general platitudes, right? But those little kind of one-on-one conversations I find can be extremely inspirational because they're realistic in that you're just trying to get people from here to here. The conversation isn't, become how do I go from just waking up out of a coma to being a millionaire next year? It's like, okay, how do I at least feel better about myself? How do I get out of this negative spiral? So yeah, the conversations are awesome.
Perfect. Now you've got a book coming out to highlight all this, right?
Yes, it actually has just been released. I don't have all the copies yet. It's called Embracing Invisible Disabilities in the Workplace, and you can find it on Amazon or Audible. I also have an audio version, which I had a little bit early. And it's really interesting how many people actually really prefer audiobooks now. So that one's doing really, really well.
Right. Oh, I can see that too, especially if you're struggling with how your brain's functioning. Reading can be very taxing on a person, and listening is all of a sudden a way to escape. I guess that kind of goes back to your checklist. What way is going to energize you and get it into yourself, right?
Yeah, and I also think the
Now
human
you've
voice makes it more
oh
human, right?
yeah,
Hearing that voice, the
right,
emotional part of it comes alive. I was just describing this the other day that the text is very cerebral, and that's great when you want to take emotion out of something like science, for instance. But there are times when you're trying to make that human connection where the voice is really hard to beat.
yeah. And most of what you do is trying to build that human emotion connection, correct? That's what's missing in this area and field, isn't it?
Yes, and the more that we put our money and focus on technology, the more I think we have to balance it out with really examining our humanity and what are we as people, and what are we doing to help other people, because we're social creatures. I mean, we're meant to want to help others and help others succeed as well as ourselves. So between kind of the competitiveness of capitalism and technology, it's very easy for that scale to become unbalanced. And I think that empathy,
Right.
compassion, humanity, and humor, again, which is a great way to kind of reassert your humanity, I think become more and more important.
Fantastic. All right, so they need to check you out on Amazon, buy the book or Audible. And how else do they find out about you? How do they get more information?
Um, I'm most active on LinkedIn, Jason David Reid. You
Hmm.
can check me out. My picture's on there. Actually, if you're listening to this, that probably won't help you. But you'll know because of my invisible disability blurb at the top. You can also check me out at chronicillnesskeynote.speaker.com. Um, that was a website that I created a long time ago when I was just focusing on chronic illness, but the SEO has been so great on it that I haven't changed it. So
Right.
chronicillnesskeynote.speaker.com will probably take you to everything you really need to know about me.
I love it. So definitely check out Jason Reid and stay tuned to the next episode of The Hardy Brain, the show that takes athletic, introverted entrepreneurs and leaders and transforms them into ironclad brain performers. Take care.